Well, today we are going to cap off patch 9.1, work out how well it has done, and give ourselves a baseline against which we can measure the performance of 9.1.5 once it's been out for a few months. Why? Well, so we can learn, understand, and hey, hopefully for 9.2 and 10.0, track WoW's comeback. Normal mode, first boss versus last boss, guild kills in the first 3 months. This is a metric that helps us understand how many guilds are hopping into the raid and how many are actually finishing the raid. Now, this number was a little staggering, to be honest. For Castle Nathria, there are 44,312 guild kills of the first boss and 35,184 for the final boss. Yeah, people stuck with it. With Sanctum, there is 20,080 guilds.
Okay, quickly, want to say something about this before he says his thing? Okay, so first of all, obviously it's like a big difference, right? Clearly. I personally, if I would be comparing how well Shadowlands is doing, then I wouldn't compare 9.1 with 9.0. I would compare like 8.1 with 9.1 and like 7.1 with 9.1, right? Just because it's very normal, no matter how well an expansion does, like, even if it's the best expansion ever, like, even if it's, like Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King, then usually the number of people that play the game goes down. That's just kind of normal, Like, usually, like, it's the player base is like this, and then an expansion comes out, and it does like this, and then it goes down, it goes down, it goes down, it goes down, and a new expansion comes out. That's a pretty normal thing for an MMO, because a new expansion is like this hyped up thing, and people come back to the game, so many people just come back for the expansion, play it a little while, and then stop. That's really normal. That always happens, right? So comparing 9.0 to 9.1 doesn't really say much in my mind. One thing to also note, though, is that it's interesting to see that quite a high percentage of the people who killed the first boss also killed the last boss. That's kind of interesting, I guess.
So a pretty decent percentage stuck around to the finish, but overall, there is a difference of around 54.7 in the first and last boss kills between the two tiers, which is kind of unreal. The normal mode players have somewhat evaporated. What about BFA then? Well, this is where it's interesting.
Perfect!
BFA had a weaker start with Uldir. 38,319 for boss 1, 27,223 for boss 8. Of course,
that's a big
context
difference.
here is that Shadowlands sold extremely well. Fastest selling PC game ever at its point of release. It seemingly did actually outperform Battle for Azeroth, so it had a massive starting point that was super successful. Now, if we move on with BFA, Dazara Lore fell down to 22,061 for boss 1 and 16,400.
Okay, wait. I just want to quickly take a screenshot of this.
32 for boss 10, which is actually quite similar to Sanctum of Domination's numbers. But...
Oh, wait. Okay, he's literally comparing. I don't know why I just took a screenshot.
Drop-off between the first 3 months of each tier
good screenshot,
is larger for Shadowlands. And remember, Shadowlands had a much stronger start with its first tier. So Shadowlands kind of had it all to gain, but ended up losing a bit.
Okay, so I actually thought this would be worse. Because if you compare this to this, because this is how you have to compare it, right? You compare these two numbers to these two numbers. And clearly Shadowlands did better than BFA. And then you compare these two numbers to these two numbers. And it is pretty much the same. I actually kind of expected this to be worse than this. Just because 9.1 took so long to come out, that cost them a lot of players, right? Of course, if you look at the drop-off here, then the drop-off is bigger, right? Like the difference between 8.0 and 8.1 is smaller than the difference between 9.0 and 9.1. But yeah, considering that it took them so long for the patch to come out and whatever, I mean, that's not even that bad. I actually assumed it would have been worse. I guess you have to think about the fact, like why did so many people leave in that time? Like, they obviously did a really bad job keeping their players. Because clearly Shadowlands performed really well in comparison, right? So why did they end up being back at the same numbers at 8.1, even though they started with a bigger number, right? So I guess the question here is like, what happened? You know, like how do you, like why did you not manage to retain a bigger portion of the players and ended up having the same numbers as BFA, even though you started lower, right? But even comparing 8.1 to 9.1 is kind of, in their eyes, probably not that bad in comparison. Like, I'm not sure if they were happy with BFA as a whole. I don't, if they weren't happy with BFA either, then, I mean, that's obviously bad. But otherwise, the difference here is actually in favor of Shadowlands, right? Because clearly those numbers combined are higher than those numbers combined. So theoretically speaking, Shadowlands did better than BFA. They lost more players between the patch, but overall they had better player numbers. Theoretically, if the normal mode boss kills is the number that you consider when you think about player base, right?
BFA guild kills went down by about 41% between Season 1 and Season 2. For Shadowlands, that same number is 55%. Now, normal mode is what many social players do, so it's a vital statistic for the average player base member.
Oh, I agree. I 100% agree with you. I think the player drop-off, because people are saying, oh, it's because of all of the scandal and whatever that happened within WoW and like the whole controversy. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that so many people, like the drop-off of the player base, I think a small percentage of it is people actually stop, like the amount of people that stop playing because of all of the things that happened within like Activision Blizzard is probably a very low percentage from the player base that actually stopped playing because of that. I think a lot of people stopped playing because of what happened in the game. Like the fact that 9.1 took so long to come out. The fact that 9.1 wasn't that great even after it got released, you know, like stuff like that. Of course, all of the scandals and whatever was like a thing on top that maybe pushed some people over the edge, for sure. But it being like the main reason for people, that's... I don't think that's like a huge amount of the player base, personally. Because, I mean, you can just compare it to different companies where similar things happened. I mean, think about Riot Games, right? Riot Games had a big scandal within their company. And did Riot Games lose a lot of players because of that? No, right? If the game would have been in like a really bad state at that point, maybe. But yeah.
These are the people who I think first will wander off to other games. What about heroic mode though? Well, this one's a bit brutal. So Castle Nathria to Sanctum of Domination, first boss guild kills in the first.
Again, I think like okay, so I do think that comparing these directly is you definitely can compare those two because obviously it's a big drop off, right? But I still don't think it's like a very like it's not like a super like necessarily relevant number because of the expansion release versus like a patch later. So I still think
3 months of each
directly comparing those two is like
had a 52% decrease. For the final boss, that decrease is 48%. I mean, it's similar enough to normal, and that means ouch. And take a look at this table. You can see the percentage of guilds that got ahead of the curve within the first 3 months of a given tier. Generally, this number should be between 50 and 67%. That's right.
Wait, what is this heroic first versus last boss? Oh, okay, I see. So this is the amount of guilds, I guess, that killed first boss, and this is the amount of guilds that killed last boss, okay? That's interesting. I like to see that comparison, actually. There's some very, like, big differences as well. I mean, look at for example, Tomb of Sargeras is doing really badly here compared to Nighthold and Antorus, right? Which I'm pretty sure had to do with the raid just being that difficult in comparison, right? I'm pretty sure I remember Tomb of Sargeras being, like, one of the more difficult raids. And then maybe Guild just kind of gave up. Yeah, and then you have really high numbers here for Antorus, interestingly. I guess the reason why Antorus is so high is because it's the last raid. That just makes sense. You have like a year. So this number makes total sense, right? Yeah, so this number is also really high here, Nyalotha. It's also the last raid. Because obviously if you have like a year to finish the raid, then obviously the number is going to be higher, right? So this number is really high. Same with like Antorus in comparison. And then these numbers are really low. Castle and Sanctum. 40% is really low. Tomb is 48. So, yeah, it's interesting that Castle Nathria is so low. I wonder why. The raid itself was kind of good, no? I mean, I don't think Castle Nathria was like the, like one of the best raids or whatever, but I do think it was like a decent raid. Less gear dropping. Sire was harder than the entirety of Nyalotha, to be honest. You think so? Sire was notoriously hard for Pug and Heroic. More mechanical skill needed? Maybe. Sire was probably a boss to struggle for... Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe Sire was just hard for Heroic guilds. A normal mode thing would be more interesting, I feel like. But maybe he has those numbers.
Nathria was 39.9. I would say likely because by the time some guilds were progressing at the end, some of the issues of Shadowlands had became apparent, but also because there are some bosses like Denathrius and Stone Legion Generals that were a bit harder towards the end, as compared to Sanctum of Domination, which is an easier raid. And as for Sanctum, its number is 43.15%. Now, these two Shadowlands ones are basically all-time lows when compared to past content, where the previous lowest was Tomb of Sargeras. Now, despite...
Oh, the one thing that he kind of is ignoring, I just realized this. Look at this number. This is the highest number out of all numbers. Like, there has been more guilds killing the first boss on Heroic Castle than in any other raid. Okay, so now I understand. The reason why this number is so low is because Shadowlands was so successful at the start, and that just means that obviously there were like so many players who just went in and killed the first boss, and then they didn't manage to kill the last boss. That's why it's such a big difference. Oh, that makes sense, right? Like that's the only logical explanation I can think of here, because all of the problems with Shadowlands, they didn't happen at the start, right? Like all of the Shadowlands problems, they happened later on. So Castle Nathria was a decent raid. Shadowlands sold well. So I was thinking, why is this such a big thing? But yeah, look at this. Like 38,000 versus like, look at Legion numbers, right? All the Legion numbers were a lot lower than this. And Uldir, was the first raid in BFA, was also lower. And it's actually interesting. It's interesting to see that Legion had so few. Because I personally, when I'm thinking about the success of like expansions, then in my mind, Legion is by far the best, Like for me, in my mind, it's like Legion, BFA Shadowlands or something, right? So seeing that Nighthold, in comparison, has been doing worse than like Uldir and Castle Nathria, that's interesting. Nighthold wasn't the first raid. Oh, true, it wasn't. Yeah, Emerald Nightmare. He didn't include that. Why not?
The previous lowest was Tomb of Sargeras.
True, you would have to compare it to Emerald Nightmare.
Despite
true,
this
true,
percentage
true.
figure
I forgot about that horrible raid.
From Castle Nathria, we can see that in more absolute terms, the actual number of guilds participating in heroic raiding has actually fallen by 51.7-ish%. That's over half compared to BFA. Itself,
wait,
7-ish.
I do want to look at this number though again. But yeah, if you look at this number, then it's definitely... Okay, so this Castle Nathria number is not bad in comparison, right? So like 15k, it's doing better than most raids, except Uldir. So lost to Uldir, doing better than everything else. This number though is the lowest out of all, right? So Sanctum of Domination definitely did do really bad when it comes to like last boss kills. So 15,000 people killed Heroic Denathrius, and 10,000 people killed the first boss on Mythic. I actually thought the number would be closer. So, I actually did think the number would be closer. I guess the reason why more people killed Denathrius and Heroic than they killed first boss on Mythic is not because of the difficulty, but because of achievements and stuff that you get from the last boss, right? Yeah, ahead of the curve, exactly. Because ahead of the curve is more desirable than killing the first boss on Mythic, I guess. Yeah. So it makes sense that he would have... Even though I would say that Mythic Shriekwing is easier than Heroic Denathrius, right? But I guess it's not as interesting for people to kill.
Which you would
Shrieking.
expect from launch to a follow-up tier, but we actually see an increase in last boss kills. Now, while not trying to downplay the obvious increase in the number of Mythic guilds that have successfully defeated the final boss of the raid this tier so far, there are a few things we should mention. This tier has been noticeably easier to progress through compared to Season 1. This is due to both raid bosses generally being easier across the board, bar one or two outliers that have since been nerfed, and, well, bigger power creep seen this time around because, of course, of the Shard of Domination system. Our resident cutting-edge raider, Dakor, certainly felt this as well, and it is actually reflected in the statistics. So here's a brilliant table. You can actually see that every boss in Sanctum of Domination, until the last 3, saw a negative difference between the tiers. That's mostly because the last 3 bosses of Sanctum of Domination are significantly easier than the last 3 of Castle Nathria. Take only the first 7 bosses, and you have a 27% average decrease versus Castle Nathria, which is hardly surprising. This actually further reinforces something we've been saying and thinking for a little bit now. The changes that frustrate and throttle, that hold back those high-end, cutting-edge players, those are changes that those players will just power through. You know? It's like, oh, Covenant swapping? Screw you! I'll make 4 Warlocks. That kind of stuff, or 4 characters, whatever, you know what I mean. I think when confronted with the same friction, heroic and normal raiders are maybe a bit more likely to just swap games. I mean, in a way, you could say that maybe their guilds are a bit less game goal-oriented versus a mythic raiding guild, so I suppose it's no wonder.
Maybe,
I mean, that certainly has happened in our guild, where, yeah, we wandered off.
I definitely think that's true, right? I think he's got a point there where he's saying that, like, a person that is like a mythic raider is pretty invested in the game, that even if the game is not doing, like, perfectly at the moment, they're more likely to stick around than a person who's like a more casual player. I think that makes sense, for sure.
During heroic progression to do other things. Finally, I've got 2 large graphs of this first versus last boss kill data from Nighthold through to now. And for normal mode, you can see that humongous surge of Shadowlands launch and then how quickly it fell off. Yeah, Shadowlands attracted a lot of people, but it lost a higher percentage of them. Heroic follows a similar trend. A lot of people, but it lost a higher...
So this is normal mode? Oh, okay. Again, like you can see the expansion curve. This is really something that is important though, right? Because no one is trying to say that Shadowlands did well or that BFA did well, but seeing a curve like this is normal. Like even if the expansion would have been really good, right? So if you look at even an expansion that you think was like incredible, then this will still look like this, right? The exact curve will be different depending on, you know, what happened, right? But it will always go down, right? You will not see an expansion where this stays here. Like that just doesn't happen in an MMO.
Heroic follows a similar trend. Last boss kills are at an all-time low for this first 3 months metric that we're using.
Wait, what's this? Oh, heroic first boss versus last boss. I see.
My guild cleared normal at a pretty average pace, so we blasted through it, and then we struggled with attendance issues during our heroic progression. We reached Fate Scribe, and then our comp just kind of fell apart.
I agree. I mean, I agree that obviously Castle Nathria was just better than Sanctum.
Hard, really.
Well, I mean, I personally think that the power creep that we had with the Unholy Shards in Sanctum of Domination was definitely bad for me as a player. I personally felt like bosses are just falling over. And then you had some really cool fights like Painsmith, which I enjoyed a lot. But yet all of this damage stop thing happening because of the... Yeah, it was just a mess. And then the last 2 bosses were Kel'Thuzad and Fate Scribe were too easy in comparison of their precision in the raid. And yeah, in Castle Nathria it was just like a much better difficulty curve. Slash Fist was a cool fight, and then you had SLG. Of course, SLG was not a generally liked fight, but to be honest with you, I personally didn't even mind SLG that much. I actually thought it was a cool fight, personally. Once they had fixed all of the bugs and the issues with the facing, I personally really didn't mind SLG that much. I didn't necessarily like the whole, you know, you have to stop damage and you wait and then you nuke everything down, but outside of that, I didn't think it was that bad. I know that it was really bad for some guilds because of the bugs that happened at the start, but once they had fixed those bugs, it wasn't even that bad of a boss in my mind. It was definitely much better than Kel'Thuzad, like, by far.
Hype cycle of a fresh patch and before the lawsuit versus heroic for your average guild.
I agree.
Mythic, then, it's what you'd expect. There's not too much.
I agree. I think the huge power increase with the shards was a problem in Sanctum, and that's a big part of why I didn't like it that much. And we're going to have the same thing again 9.2 very likely, so get ready, guys. Get ready for some tier set power creeps that will just increase your DPS by 50% or something.
We've not said. So overall then, rating data shows us a higher than normal drop-off during patch 9.1. Heroic last boss kills are at the lowest they have ever been since Nighthold, like for like. Normal is not. And that does make me wonder if the timing of FF14's rise and Blizzard's lawsuit have impacted heroic raid clear rates more than normal. Okay, let's talk about dungeons then. Mythic Plus stats are honestly brilliant. We've got access to the total number of M Plus runs done each week from BFA Season 4 to Shadowlands.
Okay, I need to get through this. I've been watching this for like
slow for
too long.
Plus, and while
I'm going to answer your questions afterwards.
Helped a bit, it was in March. That's outside our data set. BFA Season 4 started stronger and then dwindled over time.
Okay, sorry, quickly pausing just to give my opinion before he says his opinion. Okay, so let's see. This comparison here, if you ignore the first part, then clearly Shadowlands Season 1 did better than BFA Season 4, which is to be expected, considering that Shadowlands obviously is the start of the expansion here, Season 1, versus the end of the expansion. Obviously, the start always is better. And then at the same time, the end of the expansion is going to have inflated numbers because these are Mythic Plus runs. These are not individual players. This might be a lot of M Plus players at the end of BFA had lots of alts and whatever and ran multiple M Plus runs on the same character, right? So just because this number here is really high doesn't actually mean that this number is better than this number, right? Like, this is much, much better. Like, this red graph is much better than the blue graph because this is the start of the expansion versus end of the expansion, right? Now, if you ignore the blue graph, because I think it's irrelevant here, I personally don't think this blue graph should be looked at all. But if you compare it to Season 2, then you can see the difference, right? You can see the difference between Season 1 participation and Season 2. And that difference is relevant, right? Which, again, start of the expansion, second patch or whatever. But the blue graph, I personally don't think this is a relevant graph to look at here. I just don't see why you would compare the end of an expansion with the start of an expansion, personally. Because it's really, like, there's alts, there's no alts, there's, like, leveling, and then there's, like, I don't know, it's just a bunch of
our data set.
Weird
BFA Season 4 started stronger
differences
and then dwindled over time. But
know.
remember, that is comparing the final tier of an expansion versus the start of a new expansion. You would expect a final tier to be lower. Honestly,
But no, because the reasons I just said, right?
I'm surprised Shadowlands Season 1 is not higher from its outset. I suppose the only extra factor for BFA Season 4 is people running more dungeons to try to farm corruption gear. Now,
well, and people leveling here, right? Because people are not max level. Also, people having multiple characters already at this point. So you have one person maybe running on 5 different characters or something. While on this here, Season 1, people are not going to run and plus on like 5 different characters, right? At the start of an expansion.
Shadowlands Season 2 is, of course, where we get to the modern day, and it's where things are more interesting. Because Shadowlands Season 2...
And don't get me wrong, I know people think that I'm like defending Shadowlands. I personally think Shadowlands did something horribly wrong. Obviously, I stopped playing. And I'm like the last person to stop playing this game because I'm literally making a living off of playing this game. So I personally 100% agree that Shadowlands did something really bad between Season 1 and Season 2. I'm just saying that this graph kind of in comparison doesn't make sense because Shadowlands sold better than BFA. And he showed us a graph before where he literally showed us that it sold better. So comparing Season 4 to Season 1 is like...
Earlier on in the expansion, actually started below Battle for Azeroth Season 4, but above Shadowlands Season 1, which of course had a slow start. But By week 5 and week 6 of the season, the story is completely different. Season 1 of this expansion is between 800k and 1 million per week.
Well, that's because people hit max level at this point and started doing M+. That's the high point. Right? This is week 4, 5, which is where people got their characters to max level and started doing M+.
While
right?
Season 2 is down around 530k. Shadowlands Season 2 at 257k, which is shockingly low compared to Season 1, 16 weeks in. This is where the start versus end of season percentages come in.
Well, here... Okay, so if you want to compare M+, then what you should include here in this graph, in my opinion, is BFA Season 1 and BFA Season 2. Right? Compare it to Shadowlands Season 1, Shadowlands Season 2. Which, to be fair, he did earlier with the raids. Like, he did that with the raids. And now he's not doing that with M+ anymore. I just don't understand why he's doing this weird comparison here.
This is where the start versus end of season percentages come in. BFA Season 4 had a 45.9% drop in 16 weeks. Of course, owing to the very, very low start, Shadowlands Season 1 had a 45.1% increase, but Shadowlands Season 2 had a 64.3% decrease.
I mean, what? Oh, I see. Well, okay, well, that's still, okay, fine. I guess that's an irrelevant number. You would have to compare this highest point here, right? To week 16, personally thinking. That would make more sense, right? Because, I mean, obviously, the number of people who do M+ the first week is really low if everyone didn't even level their characters yet, right? So you would have to compare this highest number to week 16 here. So it would be a drop as well. It wouldn't be an increase.
This is the very, very low start.
It would be a minus number here for sure.
Shadowlands Season 1 had a 45.1% increase, but Shadowlands Season 2 had a 64.3% decrease. And that honestly surprised me in its magnitude. Season 1 didn't have dungeon teleports, it didn't have the scoring system, it didn't start with Valor points. Season 1 only really started tapering off big after like week 17. Shadowlands Season 2 then had more rewards, yet it dropped off far faster, which I suppose is concerning. But let's talk about PvP.
Oh shit, PvP numbers.
For PvP, it's nice and quick. We have total rated games tracked by type in EU and NA. We'll focus on 3v3, but as you can see in this graph, the trends are similar between like the different regions and stuff, so I'll just use these numbers. The week of August 9th, we had an average of 29,496 games played per day. Fast forward to the week of October 25th, and that number is 15,000.
Wait, what happened here? What happened in August? The PvP data didn't acquire? Oh, so maybe it's like a glitch. That could be.
We had an average of 29,496
maybe.
games played per day. Fast forward to the week of October 25th, and that number is 15,171. That's a...
Wouldn't this be even a bigger difference if you take the start of the patch, which is like somewhere here, I guess? Like here? I guess it doesn't go back that far. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it would be a bigger difference even. Like if you take the start of the patch, because this is like the middle of the patch. If you would take the start of the season, it would probably be even bigger of a difference. All right.
48.56% decrease in
my
that region.
washing machine's done.
And that is pretty brutal. Monthly active users then. So the third quarter
just wants to beep
call
like a lot.
The news that Diablo 2 Resurrected revenue was really great, but it was partially offset by lower World of Warcraft revenue. And that Blizzard has 26 million monthly active users, which is in fact stable from the last quarter. And being real...
Wait, what does this mean? Monthly user, like only WoW players, or is this something else? Okay, so he's taking data from Blizzard only, from Battle.net, but Blizzard only. Okay. That makes more sense
bad
then.
News. You gotta remember, Q2 was the 9.1 launch quarter, but 9.1 November last quarter.
Wait, sorry, I have to look at this again because I was just thinking and I didn't actually look at the graph. Okay, so these are the quarters. When did Shadowlands release? Quarter 4, 2020? No. Yes. Here, right? How did the numbers go? This can't be like real, right? The numbers went down when Shadowlands came out? Because Shadowlands sold incredibly well in comparison, right? Maybe the other games did so badly? Yeah, maybe Overwatch kind of died. Yeah, maybe that's what happened.
And being real with you, that's bloody bad news. You gotta remember, yeah, Q2
It's definitely
was
bad news.
Being real with you, that's...
I mean, to be fair, I would probably ignore this first part, right? Just because it's so long ago. And I'm not sure what happened here, because this is like the lowest point, right? And there must have... I don't know what exactly happened here, but there was something that was going well. And it surely was not WoW. I'm sure this is not World of Warcraft, right? This must be some different game that popped off. Yeah, maybe like it was Overwatch or whatever. Yeah, it must have been another game. And then if you compare it before Overwatch, then I guess it's the same, which of course is still not like... you don't want to see that, right? Like you obviously want this to like go up. So obviously it's not going great for sure overall, right? The big takeaway from this actually that I have here is the fact that no matter how well the expansion kind of does in WoW, it seems to be like not that big of an impact to this if you think about the releases, right? I mean, look, Shadowlands did really well initially, right? Like they sold it super, super well. And the graph's fucking going down. So obviously World of Warcraft doesn't have a huge impact on like the Blizzard monthly users or whatever. So that's like bad news for us. Because that means that their other games are much more important to the WoW, kind of.
Q2 was the 9.1 launch quarter, but 9.1 launched at the very end of June. So anyone who resubbed for it would have been logging in Q3 as well. So those numbers will carry over. Blizzard's Hearthstone promotion then kicked off in September, and remember, you don't count as an MAU just for having a BNet account and using it. You count as one monthly active user for every game that you play at least once per month. So if you log into Hearthstone and then you log into World of Warcraft, you will count as 2 MAUs.
Oh, okay,
so,
okay.
with heavy promotions, the launch of Diablo 2 Resurrected, which, by the way, is Activision Blizzard's best-performing remaster ever, topping Spyro, Crash, and Tony Hawk, even with all of that, their MAUs were flat. Combine that with WoW revenue not being great, and I think it does show a general decrease in Blizzard's portfolio that has been offset by D2R selling so well, their servers pretty much exploded. Q4 then will continue to benefit from the Hearthstone crossover, which pretty much had a new thing to log in for monthly, and it will also benefit, of course, from Season of Mastery, patch 9.1.5, a bit probably, and likely the release of like a new TBC phase or something. Mythic Plus had a 64.3% drop in its first 16 weeks. Normal and heroic raids were around half. The span of PvP that we covered is just shy of half as well.
What he said.
These are rough numbers, no doubt. Look, that's just how it is. They do show that 9.1 has not done a great job of keeping players around. I mean, it's no doubt, of course, spurred on partially by the Blizzard lawsuit, and perhaps people knowing that patch 9.1.5 is going to make the game, well, I mean, has made the game a lot better, a lot more playable. And I think a lot of people have maybe decided to skip 9.1 until the fixes in 9.1.5 come out. Because 9.15 even uncaps Valor points in Conquest. It opens up the Covenants. The game is far more ult-friendly. And that's why, in a few months' time, I cannot wait to revisit all of these numbers to see what 9.1.5 actually did. Will it stand the tide? Will it increase playability? Will more Mythic Keystones be done? Will more Mythic Keystone dungeons be tracked during the Time Walking week? And will we be able to work out how much engagement the Legion Time Walking feature has driven? A lot of fascinating stuff. And look, I know that these numbers do not paint a pretty picture. And because of that, this is bound to some to come off as a very negative video. But look, I kind of like the idea of doing this. It's like a little health checkup for World of Warcraft we could run every quarter or every patch. And that means that, you know, if things get better over time, and I dearly hope they will, and we're still making these videos, well, in the future, I want these videos to be able to say, hey, everyone, the numbers have all went up. People seem to be more happy, and there's more World of Warcraft being played. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. Now he's just lying. He doesn't want to make positive videos. They don't get viewers.
If 9.2 does have a decent little bump there, and certainly if 10.0 is going to be a bit more Azeroth focused, as they very much suggested in interviews lately.
Which, to be fair, doesn't speak against him. That speaks against the people who are watching it, like me. Because people watch negative stuff. They don't watch positive stuff. It's our fault.
Then perhaps we will see a big bump in the numbers for 10.0, and I think that would make us all quite happy.
Yeah, people think
Numbers go
positivity
up,
is boring.
people
That's very
stay.
true. But anyway, so I'm gonna take my conclusion from this number now, from these numbers now, okay? Because I do think he did a good job giving us all of these numbers, and I think there's a lot of things that he can take away from these numbers. The biggest thing that actually concerns me a little is the fact that actually it might be positive as well. Okay, well, let's look at it again. So first of all, this graph here concerned me a little, just because I was thinking that if a huge successful release of an expansion in WoW doesn't give them a huge increase in numbers here, then that's kind of concerning for a WoW player thinking that, wait, so Shadowlands sold better than any other expansion in a long time? I don't know how long actually, but there's nothing, it goes downwards. So that's a bit concerning for a WoW player specifically, because I'm thinking, oh, well then the importance of making a really good WoW game might not actually be, their main priority if you think about it. So that's a little bit concerning in my mind. Then I do think one thing that I thought could be positive in the future is, so this is BFA, right? And this is Shadowlands. Now, Blizzard could look at this two ways. One way they could look at this is, oh, well, we lost more people between Season 1 and Season 2 here, but BFA didn't do well and we still had the same amount of people. So maybe they were thinking almost it's impossible to retain a lot of people. The people who stay back are the people who always play. You know what I mean? Maybe that could be a takeaway from this, right? It could be, oh, no matter how good we're selling the initial expansion, we're always going to drop down to something like this. And that would be bad if they think this way. They could also look at it differently. They could say, hey, we got so many people to buy Shadowlands, and then we lost so many people. Is there any way we can retain more players for patches like this? Right? They could look at it in trying to improve the 0.1 patches, basically. They could say, hey, in 0.1 this time around, we lost so many players. Let's try to do something different in 0.1 next time to see if we can retain more. But it does also seem almost oh, well, no matter how our 0.0 patch does, we always go to the same numbers in 0.1. Which would be bad if they think this way. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure they're very well aware of the fact that there was a big drop-off here, considering the patch took so long, right? And to be honest, I feel like it can only improve, considering that they didn't necessarily do this on purpose, right? They didn't release Shadowlands and then they were like, oh, well, we're going to release 9.1 9 months later or whatever, right? They didn't plan for this to happen. They didn't plan on having such a huge time gap between those two, right? I would assume that they know that if the time gap would have been closer here between those two patches, then they probably would have lost less players. I don't think they're going to go into the next expansion and be like, oh, we're just going to do the same thing as we did in Shadowlands and we're just going to wait 9 months before we release the next patch, That's probably not going to happen, right? Are you taking into account that while development got staggered by COVID, the total number of players playing any game has increased significantly? Yes, that is actually, that is for sure a thing that you should be considering, right? Because the amount of people who actively started playing video games during COVID increased, obviously, because people had to stay home. So that's something that should be in favor of people staying in WoW. But then at the same time, no matter how much time people have to play the game, if the game doesn't release anything for super long, then yeah, I don't think anyone is surprised that the numbers between 9.0 and 9.1 or so are pretty drastic, right? I mean, at least I am not surprised. Because I know that 9.1, first of all, took way too long, and also wasn't that good. So, I mean, this comes to no surprise to me. I mean, I stopped playing myself because I was bored, right? And I also assume that it comes to no surprise to Blizzard too, and that they're gonna fix it in the future, but I mean, you never know. That's more concerning to me. Like, that the numbers went down like this is not really... Of course, it's concerning, but to me as a player, it's not as concerning because I kind of know what happened, you know? Like, I know the patch was taking that long, blah, 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 you know? Like, I kind of know why this is happening. I just hope that it's going to end up being a positive thing in the future where they look back on this and be like, oh, okay, guys, so we have to do this and change this and do that, you know? Some of the things they already did that we kind of asked them for, like with the things, you know, like the covenant swapping and like all that kind of stuff that we asked them for that they ended up doing, which is like promising. They just have to stick to it and actually like keep doing this stuff, right? And then it might actually end up being better, but who knows? I'm still so surprised by this. But I mean, I don't know.